This is the Your Career Story podcast, and you're listening to episode 78, the foolproof way to answer what are your strengths and weaknesses. Welcome to Your Career Story podcast, a show that's designed for rockstar professionals looking for that extra booster shot of confidence in their careers. Whether you're trying to get clarity on a job transition, want some work-life balance inspiration, or need a strategy to snag that promotion or raise, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Jena, ex-Wall Streeter turned startup junkie who now coaches hundreds of clients, empowering them to take back control of the job search and land their dream job. So sit back, grab a glass of wine, and prepare yourself for your weekly boost of career confidence. Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Career Story podcast. I am so excited to be back with you. I'm officially back in the office after taking 2 months off. It was glorious. I would recommend it to anyone. I'm going to do a whole podcast episode about my sabbatical, what I would do differently, what I learned from that time off. Because 2 months is nothing to sneeze at. That's a long time to be off from work. I dabbled a little bit here and there. I will say I wasn't completely out of my inbox. I didn't want to come back to 1,000 emails. Can I get an amen from anyone who's ever taken a vacation, right? And just want to thank all the people that reached out, specifically those people on LinkedIn after my wedding. And I posted it on LinkedIn. And for those of you that were listening to the podcast episode where Brent and I, my husband, talked a little bit about how we met and how LinkedIn was a part of our love story, which is so funny. And of course, kind of the most cliche thing ever, career coach and husband have LinkedIn as a part of their engagement story. I feel like we should be on like some ad for LinkedIn. Anyways, I digress. So I'm good. I'm just so glad to be back here in the office, in my new office in downtown Franklin. If you ever come to Franklin, Tennessee, let me know on LinkedIn. I would love to meet you at the local coffee shop, Frothy Monkey. So I'm just really excited to be back and back on the microphone and back sharing with you some fun, jazzy things. Before we hop into the meat and potatoes of this episode, which I'm really excited to dive in. It's a follow-up episode actually to our most popular episode, most downloaded episode here at the Your Career Story. It's episode 45. So if you've not listened to that one, you can go back there. It's the foolproof way to answer, tell me about yourself. So this one is obviously a really frustrating question. So we did a whole episode on how to answer that question. And I thought, what a perfect way to segue my way back into the microphone and back into talking to you guys via the podcast and help you answer the second most common frustrating question when it comes to interviewing is what are your strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to dive right in on that. But before we do that, I just want to share a couple of quick announcements. So we've been getting some messages on LinkedIn. Sarah's been amazing, my marketing manager, of just kind of combing through those, sending some of those my way, some of the words of encouragement you guys have been sending, but also just questions about Recruit the Employer. So for those of you that don't know, Recruit the Employer is our 5-step signature system. It's to help mid to senior level career women really figure out what they want to do and help them get to that next career change. So it's getting you from feeling super stuck and frustrated in your job search, which can I get an amen? That's the job search process can feel really overwhelming, confidence deflating. And my goal through this program, what we've helped other women do is feel confident in themselves, help them land their dream job, express themselves in an interview, and really learn how to sell themselves in an appropriate way, and then negotiate thousands more. So if that sounds interesting to you, or if it sounded interesting to you in June and you just didn't get in and purchase Recruit the Employer, we are reopening the doors October 21st. So mark your calendars. October 21st is the official launch date. If you're on my mailing list, though, we have we're actually opening it up a week early with a special huge discount. So if you're not on my mailing list and this sounds like a really interesting course for you, if you've been feeling frustrated in your job search process and you're not getting much traction and you don't know what you're doing wrong, I would make sure that you're on my email list. You can just go to jenaviviano.com/resources and download any of the resources that are on that page. That will get you on my mailing list and will alert you October 14th, which is 7 days prior to October 21st. Look at that math there. And we'll let you know that we have opened the doors for those people on my mailing list and they get a huge fat discount. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure you're on the mailing list. If not, we are reopening the doors on October 21st at full price. The second thing is, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, we would love a review from you. Reviews really help us get to the top of the search portion of Apple. So if you go over to Apple and that's where you listen to your iTunes, if you would give us, or listen to your podcast, if you would give us a review, that just helps us become more searchable, helps more people find this podcast in the career space. There's just not a lot of us right now. So we'd love your review. And also we'd love for you to share it and share with us what you're listening to. So if you're listening to this episode, direct message me on LinkedIn and share with me the number one takeaway that you got from this episode. So those are the quick announcements. Recruit the Employer opens October 21st. If you want to get early access to it, if you want to get an early bird discount, make sure that you're on my mailing list. And the second thing is, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you've been enjoying yourself, we would be so grateful for your review. All right. Let's dive into this lovely, lovely question that trips people up. So let me give you kind of a lay of the land of what we're going to be talking about today. Number one, we're going to talk about why people struggle with this question. I've worked with a lot of people and I've seen kind of the ins and outs of whether you're in finance or you're in fashion or you are early in your career or later in your career, a lot of there's so much similarities in why people struggle with certain things. And it's not that different from industry or job profession or time in a profession. So I'm going to share with you why I find that people struggle with this question and how you can avoid those pitfalls. Then we're going to talk about why companies and hiring managers actually ask this question. So I think a lot of people get really tripped up with not knowing why companies ask certain questions. Maybe they don't know why they ask, tell me about yourself. The same thing goes true for this question. So we're going to walk through why companies ask this question. Then I'm going to give you some examples of some strengths and examples of some weaknesses, because I think that's super helpful just to bring any clarity that you need to this. A lot of people are just like, I just need a list just to look at and maybe I can pick one out for myself. We're going to give you that list. The next thing that we're going to do after that is give you a script for how to answer this question. So if you're like, Jena, I just don't know. Okay, I got all the pieces. I understand why I don't like this question. I understand why hiring managers ask this question. You've given me some examples. How do I actually phrase this in a sentence? We're going to help you do that. And if you stay to the end, we have a discount code actually for our interview prep guide over in the shop. So why do people struggle with this question? Here's the number one reason that I think people struggle with this question. It's kind of the same reason or the same kind of methodology around why people think companies ask this question. They are not out to get you. So I know that this may be hard to believe, but an employer is not out to get you. They want to find a really great candidate. They want to find someone that's going to be a good fit for their team. They want you to succeed because they don't want to keep on looking, because recruiting is an exhausting process, not just for recruiters, but for hiring managers and for the teams that you would potentially be a part of. It's exhausting for you as well, which you know. So they're not out to get you. I want to just be very clear that when you go into an interview, and if the person seems like they're out to get you, you probably don't want to work for them. I was just talking to somebody recently. It was actually my sister, and she was telling a story about another friend who went in for an interview, and the guy was just kind of berating her friend about like just second guessing everything and kind of wanted him to fail. And I'm like, you don't even want to work for that person. That sounds like a terrible person to work for. So if they are berating you, and if you really truly feel like they're trying to trip you up in a way that's not helpful or in a way that's challenging, but not really empowering, you probably don't want to work for that person anyways, if that doesn't sound interesting to you. So I want you just to kind of frame this up. A lot of people struggle with this question because they feel like the interviewer is out to get them. That is just 95% of the time not true. So that's number one reason. Then the second reason is that people are not actually clear on what their strengths and their weaknesses are. So we have to first kind of put the foundation down that, okay, we have to understand that an employer is not out to get us. Okay, now once we understand that, we have to know what we actually have to offer in answering this question. We have to actually know what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are. And so many people walk through their careers or run through their careers or like look back and like, where did my career go? And don't actually spend the time to reflect. I think we have so much of a forward-thinking mentality, which is really great. I'm a forward-thinking person. But in order to appropriately move forward, you also have to reflect back. So reflecting back on a regular basis will make this question a lot easier for you to answer once you get an interview, right? Because if you're constantly thinking about what your strengths and your weaknesses are, not in an offensive way, but just like kind of like in meditation. I don't know if you guys meditate, but when they talk about a meditation is like, if you have a thought, watch it pass by, don't judge it. And I think the same thing holds true for your strengths and weaknesses. You have to just think about, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Don't judge them. Just observe what they are. And a lot of people don't want to do that because it feels really scary. It feels really vulnerable, which it kind of is. And then we're just not clear. And so when we get to this question in an interview, we actually don't know what to say because we don't know what our strengths are and what our weaknesses are. It's okay for you to have both. A lot of people get really offended about having a weakness. Newsflash, you're human. This side of eternity, you're going to have a weakness. It's just the way it goes, right? We can't all be good at everything, and an employer is not expecting you to be. The third thing is that people worry about. So first, people struggle with this question because they think someone's out to get them. The second reason is because they don't actually know what their strengths and weaknesses are. And maybe some of this is resonating with y'all. And the third reason is that they're too worried about what someone wants them to say versus what is actually true. So this kind of piggybacks off of my last statement of just people not being clear in what their strengths and weaknesses are. Sometimes people, I've seen this happen so many times. Sometimes as women, we're worried about what someone wants us to say. And we're trying to like triangulate and put ourselves into a box that maybe we don't fit into because maybe it's not actually true. And so when we answer this question, it comes off inauthentic because it's not actually true of us. So I've seen this happen many, many times. And I'm all for, if you guys have listened to any of my podcasts, have been in any of my courses, you know I'm all for thinking about what's the employer care about. But at the same instance, you have to answer a question through the lens of what's true for you. You can't just say like, oh, I know the employer cares that I'm good at editing, and I'm going to say I'm good at editing, even though I'm not good at it. Like that does not compute. It's more about being strategic. You have to not worry as much about what they want you to say, but versus what is actually true through the lens of the job description, through the lens of what they would actually want. You have to remind yourself, like, this is a deep question. It's a deep, deep question. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but asking this question, think about this. This is the first time. Let's say you're going on a date for the first time. And on the date, they say, okay, well, tell me about yourself. It's like, put on a show, right? That's the first question you're usually asked. And you're like, okay, I got through that one. And then you're on the second part of the date and it's like not even dessert yet. And they're asking you, so tell me what your biggest strengths are. And what are you really terrible at? It's like, that, excuse me, I just met you. So you have to remind yourself that it's okay if you feel a little queasy with this question because it's actually a very deep question. It's okay. And it makes sense if it makes you nervous. It touches on our vulnerabilities. Weaknesses we can get vulnerable with that, right? It touches on just like who we think we are. And I think that a lot of our careers in general are a lot more emotion filled than we give them credit for. Oftentimes, we approach our careers in a very transactional lens when actually our careers are very multidimensional and there's a lot of emotions packed into that. We touch on money, you touch on your presentation skills. Do people like me? Do people not like me? And there's a lot of things that are going on in our brain, especially during an interview. So compounding that with a very vulnerable question, of course, it's natural for you to feel nervous. However, this is a totally preparable question, okay? So you have to get your mindset right first before you get into this question. Because if you don't get your mindset right first and you start thinking, well, someone's out to get me, I need to just say what they want me to hear, what they want to hear. I can't think about it. But at the same time, I'm feeling like I'm super vulnerable and I'm super insecure and I'm not really sure. It's gonna blow up. It's not going to work for you. So people really struggle with this question because they don't acknowledge it. Hey, this is a vulnerable question. So you have to acknowledge that. Look at it in a matter-of-fact lens. Start to kind of think for yourselves, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Don't judge them. Just observe what they are. And then the next step after that would be to layer them through the job description. Think about, what do they actually care about? Which one of my strengths can I highlight and bring to the top? And which one of my weaknesses won't drown me? And we're going to go through kind of an example of what that looks like. But I just wanted to kind of frame that up before we get into why companies ask this question, because I think it's so important for you to recognize that this question is normal for you to be frustrated with and annoyed with because it's a vulnerable question. I don't think we talk about that enough. Interviewing is very vulnerable. So now that we've talked about that, let's talk a little bit about why companies ask this question to begin with. Again, we talked about it's not because they're out to get you. Here's an equation that I think is relevant, and you can write this down if you're taking notes. Please don't be taking notes while you're driving if you're listening to this while you're driving. But I really feel like this question helps get to the root of character plus self-awareness plus skills. Character plus self-awareness plus skills. And quite frankly, all of interviewing is really this equation equals whether you're a good candidate or not, right? Character plus self-awareness plus skills equals candidate or not a candidate. So they're asking this question because they want to understand your character. They want to understand, are you truthful? Are you honest? Are you just telling them what they want to hear? Because I know that an employer will call you out if you do that. I had an employer do that to me one time when I was in an interview. It was very embarrassing. Second part is the self-awareness. This question is all about self-awareness. Do you know what your strengths are? Do you know what your weaknesses are? Are you able to articulate them? And then the last part of that equation is the skills portion. So do your strengths match up with the skills that they want to have in this role? And do your weaknesses not hinder you so much that you can't do the role? Character plus self-awareness plus skills. That is the equation. And this is why this question's asked, because those are the three things they're trying to figure out. They want to know, do you know yourself? And we talked about it. A lot of people don't know themselves. So you will have an advantage if you know and are very confident with stating what your strength and what your weakness is. Again, this is a preparable question. This isn't one that maybe they'll ask, maybe they won't ask. They'll ask a variation of this question, even if it's not, what are your strengths and weaknesses? They're going to ask this question of like, tell me about a time when you exemplified some strengths. It's the same question. It's the same idea, just asked in a different way. They want to know if you're confident in your skills, but also humble at the same time. So I've seen people go on different ends of the spectrum, but for most people, they tend to lean on the I don't want to brag about myself spectrum, especially my ladies. If you're listening to this, you're really worried about, I don't want to come across as too arrogant or too confident or bossy, when I would rather you be confident and matter of fact. I equate confidence with matter of factness. Like, I'm just really good at this. I know that I'm really good at this. I really know that I'm really bad at this. And if you say it in that kind of context, it doesn't feel as abrasive to an employer, as abrasive to somebody else. It wouldn't feel abrasive if I said it to my husband or I said it to my friend. Now, if I'm saying, I'm the best at this, I'm the absolute best at this, which we know there's a lot of people that could be better than us at certain things, right? And they also ask this question, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Because they want to make sure, like I said, you don't have any glaring weaknesses. Like, for instance, if editing is the number one portion of the job and you said that your weakness is editing, red flag for the employer, which all of you are smart enough to know not to do that. One, if that is the case, you shouldn't have even applied for the job. And two, you would know not to do that. So that's why companies ask this question. They want to get to know you, they're not out to get you. They want to know what your character is like. They want to know if you're self-aware, and they want to know if you have the skills to really get the job done. Those are the three things they care about. So you are the business owner of your career. You can, if you start to think about yourself like that, you understand why they ask these questions, right? You understand that you have the opportunity to share who you are in your career. You're in control of your career. You're in control of the narrative. You just need to take control of the narrative. Too many people are not proactive enough in their career. They're reactive enough. They're too reactive in their career. So when they get to questions like this, they don't know the answer to them because they have not thought about it. So your strengths are actually your selling points. Your strengths are the things that they're going to remember later on. Specificity really matters. So let's dive into some strengths that you can use. So how to evaluate your strengths. This is a really important question. So if you're like, Jena, I actually don't know my strengths. I'm feeling a little bit shameful about that right now. One, don't feel shame. Just move forward and actually write some things down. So here's some questions you can ask yourself. One, what are you celebrated for in your job? If you're aware of what you're celebrated for in your job, most likely there is a strength attached to that. Now, what a lot of people run into is they'll say, well, yeah, Jena, I've been told that I've this, and this, but they feel like soft skills, there's nothing I can anchor them to. They just feel like floaty things that I can't really quantify. Those are still strengths. You can frame them up. And we talk about this in Recruit the Employer of like how to frame them up so that they sound more impressive or as impressive as they actually are. I know that for a lot, especially if you're really good at like managing people, or if you're really good at doing a lot more of those softer skills that actually make up the culture of the organization and make the organization fruitful over the long term, they are hard to quantify. I get that. They are hard to anchor down, but that's where stories really come into play. And that's where you can share a story about a time when and the results that it was able to produce, right? Second thing that you can ask yourself if you're trying to evaluate your strengths is, what are you doing when you feel like you're in the zone? When you're in the zone. So I know for myself, when I am writing, I'm in the zone. I'm like headphones in the zone. I could be doing it for hours. I also sometimes get that way when I'm updating my website. Like, those are some things that I love to do. I feel like I'm in the zone when I'm doing it. And I look up and I'm like, oh my gosh, 4 hours have passed. What are you doing when you feel like you're in the zone in your career? So what are you celebrated for? And what do you feel like you're in the zone with? Most likely, if you answer those two questions, they should come out with relatively similar answers to what your strengths are. Switching jobs can be a very confusing process. Is now the right time? Is it too soon? How do you make sure you do it without burning bridges? What if there's a downturn in the economy? Is it still smart to explore new opportunities? While everybody's story is a bit different, there are some key red alarms that will help guide you as you discern if a career move makes sense for you. Sometimes you don't need to overthink a decision, but just decide to move forward. I've created a handy-dandy guide to help you discern if now is the right time to start looking elsewhere. Head on over to www.jenaviviano.com/change to snag my guide, 6 ways to know it's the right time to change jobs. In this guide, I'll walk you through how to understand your motivations for moving jobs, tips on how to start exploring a new move, examples of when not to move, and journal prompts to help you see where you're actually stuck. Again, head on over to www.jenaviviano.com/change to get your guide today and see if a job change is on the horizon for you. When you're done with the guide, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can't wait to hear what you figured out. All right, back to the episode. I would also recommend, if you're still feeling stuck, to write down 3 soft or hard skills that you can attach results or accomplishments to. So if you're like, okay, Jena, I'm kind of getting this. Okay, I want you to write down physically on a piece of paper. Do not miss this step, because if you don't do it now, you're not going to do it later. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. So I want you to write down 3 soft or hard skills that you can attach to results or accomplishments. So what I tell most people, and this is why we're actually creating a career journal, because I just feel like so many people don't evaluate or think through what they've done in their career. And they get to the end of the year and they're like, I know I worked a lot of hours. What did I do? If you're raising your hand right now in your car or on your subway ride, hopefully, or walking to work or wherever you are listening to this, and you're raising your hand right now because you're like, yes, that's me. I worked a ton, but I don't know what I did. You need to start documenting that on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. And once you're able to do that, you're going to be able to look over the course of your entire career and say, oh gosh, wow, I did all these things this year. And here's the accomplishments that were attached to it. And here's the skills that I utilized. All of this stuff is really important because it's going to help you in interviews, but it's also going to help you realize that what you do matters. I think so many of us walk through life, we're like, do I matter? Does what I do matter actually at work? Am I making an impact on my team or on the world? I think that's a question a lot of us have been asking ourselves, especially post-COVID, or we're still in COVID, but at the time of this recording, but post the bulk of crazy COVID where we were all in lockdown. I mean, it was a time when I think a lot of people were really reflecting on like, what I'm doing matters? Does it matter what I do? So this is one way that I think for you, just the strengths and weakness question, even if you're not interviewing right now, is a great question to review. How would I answer it? Because it's going to get to, what am I doing? Do I like what I'm doing? Am I doing the right things? All right. So this is just a recommendation too. If you are actually in an interview process and you have a job description and you start writing down, like, these are all my strengths, I would look at the ones that match up with the job description, right? Obviously, that's going to make sense. In an interview, you want to look at the job description, you want to evaluate it, see what is pulled out of that. Again, if you struggle with that and you need help with that, Recruit the Employer, we talk about how to read a job description effectively and not breeze through it and go down just to the requirements, because that's what most people do. That the job description is going to be a treasure trove of information for you. So I don't want you to ever think about just the job description and you have to pull something out from there. I want you to look at your strengths first and then pull something out. So they both work together. And finally, I don't want you to ever be embarrassed by your strengths. Okay, this is a word to a woman right now that's listening. You have strengths. You were gifted them. You did nothing except for steward them to garner them. So I think about certain gifts that I have that maybe my sister doesn't have, or my sister has certain gifts that I don't have. Genetically, we were just born with those certain gifts and didn't do anything to have them. We just were gifted them when we were born. Okay. I learned how to steward them. She learned how to steward them. And that's the part that you worked at. But at the ultimate, you can't be embarrassed by your strengths. I think so many women are embarrassed to say that they're good at something when the reality is you did nothing except for steward it to garner it. So you have to make sure that you're not embarrassed by your strengths, being matter-of-fact confident, like, yeah, I'm gifted at this. We need more women that are matter-of-factly stating this is what I'm good at. Not in a bossy way, not in an overcompensating way, not in a way that's going to try to be like, yeah, look at me, I'm a woman and I am doing all the things and you should look at me now. Like that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how do we humbly come to the table and say, hey, this is what I'm good at. This is what I can offer to a team. I'm really confident that if you put me in this role, I can get work done. That is the kind of confidence an employer is looking for. That's the kind of confidence you want to work with, right? You want to work with somebody that has that type of conviction, that confidence, but isn't so arrogant and in your face that like, look at me, I'm so amazing. And I don't think if you're listening to this and you struggle with confidence, you're ever going to get to that point, but just need to say it, okay? So I think it's important to recognize what the facts are. But in order to get what the facts are, you have to spend some time in reflection. So anyways, trust your instincts. You are allowed to have those strengths. You're allowed to confidently talk about them. After all, an employer wants you to talk confidently about them. They want to know that you're confident in your skills because if you're not confident in them, they're not going to be confident in you. I actually found this quote by Simone Biles and I loved it. It was really funny because she said something really interesting. She said, if I say I'm the best gymnast there is, the reaction is, oh, she's cocky. No, the facts are literally on the paper. I think it's important to teach young girls that. She literally was the best gymnast out there. Point being, it's okay to be confident in your success. There is nothing wrong with saying, I am the best gymnast there is, because she literally has a gold medal to prove it, right? And while you may not have a gold medal to prove you're the best at managing a team or you're the best Excel master, you do know what you're good at. Don't second guess that. Okay, I'm going to be off my soapbox and we're going to get into understanding your weaknesses. I just think it's so important to talk about. And not enough people are talking about how we can encourage men and women, but specifically women, on owning their gifts, owning their talents, and recognizing that I was born, like using Lady Gaga, baby, I was born this way. Like truly, like I was born this way. I didn't do anything to acquire these skills and these gifts. All I did was I nurtured it, I cultivated it, I worked hard in it, and now I have this to show for it. Amazing, right? If you think about it like that, it just totally flips the switch. Okay, I digress. All right, let's talk about weaknesses. So this is an opportunity for you not to beat yourself up. It is so easy for us to only pay attention to our weaknesses and never pay attention to our strengths. So I made a choice early on in my career where I realized on Wall Street I was really bad at finance. And I wasn't very good at it. I truly wasn't. My brain does not think I could do it if I tried really, really hard. That is not the same thing as being good at something. Naturally gifted. I was not naturally gifted at finance. Terrible place to find that out. But I realized to myself, instead of me trying to like constantly fix and improve the thing I'm really not great at, which is not in my natural wheelhouse, I'm going to double down on the things I'm actually good at, the things that I actually like, so that I can bring more of that to the world. Genius, right? It was like a light bulb moment for myself. I feel like I talk to so many people that get frustrated in their careers and flustered in their careers because they're trying to overcompensate in the areas that they're not good at, when really they should be doubling down on the things that they're gifted at. Because if you're doubling down on the things you're gifted at, you're naturally going to progress farther. So if you have weaknesses, which we all do, don't beat yourself up, but also don't beat around the bush when answering this question, okay? So I see a lot of people do is they give fake weaknesses, or weaknesses that aren't actually true, or weaknesses they couldn't back up or show a time when they exemplified that weakness, or how that was a weakness for them, or why they think it's a weakness. So what I usually recommend is that these weaknesses, again, similar to how you looked at what are my strengths and wrote them down, I want you to write down what are my weaknesses. If your weaknesses far exceed your strengths, we have a problem there. I don't want you to have like this long, long list of weaknesses and not a long list of strengths. So they have to be about even, I would say. Less weaknesses is probably better. So if you see these weaknesses, they should be the things that if you're applying for a job and you're looking at a job description, they're what I call spotlight adjacent. My husband actually came up with this term. He said, I like to be spotlight adjacent. Like I don't like to be the center of attention, but I'm totally fine being like the backup guy in the background of the band. Like he's a drummer and he's like, I don't need to be the lead singer. I'm totally cool being in the back being the drummer. So I'm like spotlight adjacent. So I think the same thing is true for our weaknesses, right? I love that phrase. It's so funny. And it shows just his humility. I just love him. But he said, but I do love that we can use this actually for weaknesses. So with weaknesses, when you're looking at the weaknesses that you potentially have, you don't want to be the ones that are in the spotlight, that are going to be like, the employer's going to be like, ooh, we need that one, right? And their job description, if written well, should give you ideas of what the actual things are they need for this role. So you obviously don't want to have the opposite. You want to have the thing that's spotlight adjacent. So let's say that the job really requires you to be good at managing teams, requires you to be excellent at project management, and requires you to be, technically sound. Okay. Let's say you're applying for a senior product management position. You have some people underneath you. Okay. You do not want to say that you are really bad at coordinating and cross collaboration. You don't want to say that you don't have really any product knowledge. Those are spotlight things, right? What you would want to say, spotlight adjacent, is like, presentation skills are not really my forte right now, but this is how I'm working to improve that. That is a true statement, and recognizing that you need to improve that and showing how you're looking to improve that. It's okay to talk about the elephant in the room. It's okay to confidently talk about your weaknesses too. It is okay to talk about your strengths in a very positive way, the same way that you talk about your weaknesses. You can talk about those in a positive way as well. So you don't need to be like beating yourself up, but you also don't want to beat around the bush and make something up. Here is what my least favorite example is. Please don't use this one. Perfectionism. I hate this weakness because it's not a real weakness. I don't believe. It can be, but the way that it's phrased is for positive leaning. I'm not a fan of, some coaches will recommend, hey, use some weaknesses that can have a positive spin. I don't think employers really want to see that, because if they're really looking for your skills, your self-awareness, and your character, they don't want to know that. They want to know what your real weakness is. And then you are doing a disservice to yourself and the employer if you do not share that. So do not use the word perfectionism. Use maybe bad at time management, or because essentially if you're saying that you're a perfectionist, you're not getting work done on time because you're tootling with it too much. It's your bad with time management. You need to work on your time management, right? Or you need to work on letting something be less than perfect. Perfectionism is not really a great answer. I want you to tease that out a little bit more. Okay. So that gives you an idea of how we need to think about weaknesses, how we need to think about strengths. Now let's give you some examples. So here is an example of a strength. So when you get asked this question, what are your strengths? Or tell me about a time when you exemplified XYZ strength. What I actually want you to do when you're asked the question, what are your strengths and weaknesses? I want you to anchor a word or a phrase to that. So if you say, what a lot of people do wrong is they'll say, okay, I have these 4 strengths, too many strengths. Give 1 or 2 strengths at a time. Because people, when they're audible listener or people that are listening, if you give them too many things and don't structure your answers enough, it's going to be really overwhelming and really confusing for them. I was in a coaching program actually, and the girl that led the program, she was kind of all over the place in how she explained things. It was very hard for me as a listener and the learner to really understand what my next steps were. She was very, very hard to understand. That's why when we do these podcast episodes, we really structure them out so that you can anchor yourself and understand what you're doing, right? And you can follow what we're saying, even if I do go on tangents. So, which I do, I'm aware of that. So for the strengths, I want you to anchor it to a word or a phrase, and then I want you to share a story of how you exemplified it. So some great examples could be enthusiastic, self-starter, entrepreneurial, loyal, creative, disciplined, patient, flexible, perceptive, outgoing, logical, tenacious, confident, strategic thinker, problem solver. And problem solver is kind of strategic thinker and problem solver are kind of my least favorite because they're the most cliche. But if you have a very strong example of how you've exemplified that is going to be really helpful. So I gave you mostly soft skills because those are the ones that are harder to kind of anchor yourself to or to come up with, if you will. The hard skills are a lot easier. So I would recommend if you're asked this question to give a soft skill and to give a hard skill. Right? And the way that you would phrase this in an interview is, let's say they ask you, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And you would lead and you would say, well, based off feedback and self-reflection, I believe that my biggest strength is my entrepreneurial spirit. I have a tendency to think outside the corporate mold and bring new ideas to the table that help companies move faster towards those goals. For example, when I worked at Prudential, we blank. Give an example. So I'm going to read that to you again. So if I was asked this question, I'm going to break it down for you too. If I was asked this question, I would say based off of feedback and self-reflection, right? So that first person is showing social proof. right? Based off of feedback. That means other people have told you that this is your strength and your self-reflection, touching on the self-awareness. So based off feedback and self-reflection, I believe, not I think, I believe my biggest strength is my entrepreneurial spirit. Okay. Now, this might be good if you're going for, this one's really good if you're going for a startup or if you're actually going for a corporation where they are looking for somebody who's a self-starter or somebody who can think outside the box for their team. So I have a tendency to think outside the corporate mold and bring new ideas to the table that help companies move faster towards their goals. For instance, when I worked at Prudential, we blank. So I want you to end that. So it's very clear entrepreneurial spirit, right? Very clear that somebody else thinks that about you and very clear on how you've exemplified that. That is a really great way to answer what are your strengths because it gives somebody, the employer, something to anchor themselves to. Okay. So that's kind of how you want to break it down based off of feedback. This is what I believe my biggest strength is. Here's an example of it. Really easy, simple, break it down. Okay. Now, weaknesses, if you get asked this question, which you will probably get, what are your strengths and weaknesses, right? Give us an actual weakness. Don't beat around the bush and then share how you're working to improve it. This is where me and some career coaches, we kind of differ a little bit, where a lot of career coaches will tell you, spin it into something positive. This is my way of spinning it into something positive. Define what the weakness is, be confident in what your weakness is. Confidence and weakness is still a thing. And then share how you're working to improve it. So here's some examples, just a couple of them that are more, less technical, but again, more of those soft skills. So procrastinator, confrontation, organization, internalizing issues, public speaking, writing, giving feedback, delegation skills, and distracted. Those could all be ones. So obviously, again, make sure that it's not the exact same one that you need to do the job really well. So for me, I know that being a procrastinator is something that I really have struggled with in the past. So a way that I would answer this question is saying, yes, I know that I'm a procrastinator. So one of my biggest weaknesses is probably around follow through, or I wait until the last minute. And I know that can be really frustrating for fellow team members. So what I've been doing in order to mitigate that and mitigate any stress on my team is I actually create mini deadlines for myself, and I have an accountability partner to ask me, have you finished this thing on time? And so that's one way that I'm working to improve. But I definitely know that that's one of my weaknesses, but I also know how to move forward in that. Okay, so that's one example. Another example of a weakness that you could say is, let's say that you are leading a team and you really do not like giving feedback. Confrontation is not your jam, which is a lot of people, right? You could say, one of my things that I'm working on, so you don't even have to say weakness. One of the things that I'm working on is learning how to give feedback better. I've actually been taking some courses online. I know that's one of the areas that I don't feel as comfortable with. I didn't grow up in a home that actually was really big on confrontation. So having to do it in the workplace is a stretch for me. But over the tenure of my past 5 years working in a management type role, I've definitely gotten better in giving feedback. I've been told I've been getting better at giving feedback in a more constructive way and not just avoiding the conversation. But it's one of those things that I know I'm continually going to have to work on. That's a great answer, right? Matter of fact, states it in a positive lens, explains how you're working to improve it. That is great self-awareness, right? Employers are not looking for perfect people. They're looking for people that can imperfectly lead or imperfectly come to the table and be honest about who they are and what they're about. A whole person, right? Awesome, guys. This was a really long episode to come back to, but hopefully it was really, really helpful for you to understand, why do employers ask this question? How can you think through it yourself? What do you need to be doing on a continual basis? Not just, again, don't wait till the last minute when you have an interview and you're preparing for all these other questions. This is one question that is easily preparable 6 months in advance or before you're even looking. You should know the answer to this question. If someone were to come up to you on the street or in the elevator and say, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Not like that would be awkward or anything, but they ask you that question, then you should be able to answer it in a very clean and concise way using this formula. So it's been really fun to be with you guys. If you want to deep dive on this, if you're like, wow, I have some interviews coming up, this is a super helpful episode. I'm going to listen to episode 45, but I don't know how to answer questions like, or what questions to ask an employer. I don't know what I should do in this type of interview. I don't know how to answer other questions that are really, really common. If you need help with that, go to jenaviviano.com/shop and use interview 10 at checkout, and that will give you 10% off of our interview prep guide. So jenaviviano.com/shop, interview 10 at discount. And you can get a discount on that interview prep guide, get you all prepared for an interview. We've had some really great feedback on that interview prep guide. All right, guys, I will see you next week on the Your Career Story podcast. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for listening to Your Career Story podcast. I would love to get to meet you. And there are a couple of ways that we can connect in between episodes. First and foremost, you know I love my LinkedIn. Second is via Instagram. And third is over on my website. I actually have a special spot just for you full of fun, free resources. So all you have to do is go to www.jenaviviano.com/resources. Super simple for a bunch of freebies that will help you boost your career. Hope to see you next week.